Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Hey, thank you very much for joining us here today on another Tuesday edition episode. You are tuned in for episode number 894. Well, today I am going to look at a listener question. Now, this came in a while ago, and I was kind of going through these again, and this one popped up, and I thought I would like to talk about this really quick. And I want to get back into teaching just a little bit more on these Tuesday episodes and helping those of you who have tuned in to the Off-Farm Income Podcast for its original purpose, which is to help you figure out a way that you are going to make it, how you are going to achieve the lifestyle that we are all seeking. And I do enjoy teaching, and I'm not teaching college courses anymore. I got too busy to do that, so that had to drop off. And so, here is my opportunity. So here's what this email said. And it says, "Good afternoon. I hope this email finds you well. I started listening to both Off-Farm Income and the D&B Supply Show about a year ago and enjoy them both tremendously. I'm currently working in the green industry, but my dream is to have a cow-calf operation with a decent direct-to-consumer meat business. I will be a first-generation farmer. I think my story has and will have value to others. I see interest in both the entertainment of following along with me and possibly as a roadmap for fellow first-generation farmers. I am trying to decide between a podcast or a YouTube channel to share the story. Did you consider a YouTube channel as part of your off-farm income? How long did you produce podcasts before you monetize? Thank you for your time. Have a blessed day." Okay, so very good. I read this again today and I thought, I want to touch on a couple things here. Now, what jumps out to me about this note that may not jump out to you if you're not already self-employed, you're not already using entrepreneurship to build that life that you're looking for, is the way that, and this gentleman's name is Brendan, and I've corresponded with Brendan. I responded to this email when it came in originally. But the way that Brendan phrases this, he says, let me find it here again, he wants to have a, quote, decent direct-to-consumer meat business. Now that jumps out to me, and not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. A very, very natural way. But this is one of those things when we are not necessarily born entrepreneurs. And I am not. I never was, and I still am not. I still mitigate all of my risk, and I'm careful about what I do. But when we're not a natural-born entrepreneur, we tend to give ourselves a parachute or a safety net, right? And so when he says a decent direct-to-consumer meat business, that's a safety net. That is him, well, in my opinion, if it was me, it would be me giving myself a soft way to land if I fail by saying direct-to-consumer meat business. But it has an impact on how hard you go for it when you use that type of phraseology. Now, why didn't he write, I want to have the best direct-to-consumer meat business, or I want to have an incredible direct-to-consumer meat business, or how about this? I want to develop a direct-to-consumer meat business, and that be the only thing I do for my living. Why not that? Why a decent direct-to-consumer meat business? And that has to do with what we talk about. We talk about imposter syndrome. Who am I to think that I could start a business and go off and do this on my own? That has to do with the self-doubt that people around us put into us, whether that's friends or family. That has to do with all the years spent working maybe in a job we don't enjoy and around other people who are in a job they don't enjoy, and them thinking there's no way out. You just got to ride this thing out, and the next good moment in your life is going to be when you finally get to retire and start collecting a pension and do nothing. Which, by the way, doing nothing sounds like death to me, everybody. So that is no... if you're listening to this show, you really need to reframe your definition of retirement. If your definition of retirement is do nothing or finally get to do what I want. Let's start doing what we want every day right now. Let's not wait until we're 65, or retirement age keeps going up, 67. Let's not wait for that. So that adjective, the decent direct to consumer meat business, I know, at least I believe I know exactly where he's coming from. And that is, if I sit there and say I'm going to have a great one that this is all I do for a living because this is really my dream, that's scary to say that. It's scary to put that out to the universe, because what if you don't achieve it? And if you guys listen to the show, you've heard me say many, many times that there was a point in my life, about 2009, 2010, where I had a dream of the lifestyle I wanted. And as hard as I tried, and I tried hard, I spent a lot of my waking hours and my going to bed, laying in bed hours, thinking about this with intense concentration. What is the path forward? How do I achieve that lifestyle that I am looking for? And I could not come up with an answer. And I don't consider myself an unintelligent person. I was racking my brain. I was listening to people, podcasts, reading books, everything I could do. And I could not come up with an answer. I couldn't do it. And that's depressing. That's depressing. And it, metaphorically speaking, it feels like you're outside of the restaurant and you're looking in through the window and everybody in there is having a great time and they're fulfilled and they're happy and they're right where they want to be. They're warm and they're comfortable and all of that. And you're standing outside and it's windy and it's cold and it's dark and it's not where you want to be, and you can't find the door to get in. You cannot find the door. And I got to the point where I would not allow myself to dream about that lifestyle any longer, because it became something that was depressing to me, because I couldn't figure out how to get in. I could not figure out how to find my way into that world, and I kind of became resigned to the fact that you must have to be special. You must have to be born with a certain aptitude to live in that world, and I wasn't. And so I need to quit dreaming about it, just like I need to quit dreaming about slam dunking a basketball or hitting 40 home runs in the major leagues. I need to quit dreaming about those things because they're not going to happen. That's not who I am. And that is a depressing thought. Now, thankfully, I did not give up. But it wasn't a conscious decision to not give up. There was just something inside me internally that kept me trying. Now, I'm not a natural-born entrepreneur, and I don't have... back then, I could not see opportunity the way I see opportunity today. So, just like what Brendan did with that adjective, I would tell people what I wanted to do, but I would downplay it, because in my mind, if I could just develop something that was decent, man, that was all I could hope for. That's how I thought back then. And so that really jumps out to me in this email. And and I've corresponded with Brendan and talked about this. And this is one of those things, though, for all of you out there who are in the same boat. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk. I did a post about waking up in the morning and watching one of his videos, and it gets me motivated for the rest of my day. And I'm older than this guy, and I'm a big fan. And the guy is very, very motivational. And he'll be the first to say his advice would be, because I'm going to talk about having a house payment, having a family, and all of that. His advice would be, if you don't have money and time to put into your side hustle to build the life you want, maybe your house is too big. Maybe you need to sell your house and rent. I mean, it's a pretty radical piece of advice he gives. But back in 2009, 2010, I had a wife, a daughter, I was the sole breadwinner, and we had a house payment. And so that was part of the obstacle to me for being able to envision a path forward and to see how I was going to get to this lifestyle, this entrepreneurial, agricultural-based lifestyle that I wanted so badly. That was part of it, because every time I thought of an idea and I realized what it would take to make that idea come to fruition, I realized, oh my goodness, I need this time. I've got a wife, a daughter, and a house payment, and I'm the only one working. So how in the world is any of this going to happen? Now, the answer to that is that it's not. Now, don't shut off the podcast. I don't want you to think that's the message here. The answer to that is it's not. For now, you're in a stage of life at that point, like I was. Now, in my case, our priorities were this. My wife, Autumn, is a career-oriented person, and so she was taking a time out from her career to raise our daughter until she got to school. That was what we had decided to do. Now, some of you are going to have a spouse that is going to stay home a lot longer than that, and that's fine too. That's totally based on your value set and how you want to do things. But for me, what I had to look at was I've got X amount of time until Autumn gets back in the workforce. And this is time where I'm going to be planning and laying foundation and trying to figure out what in the world it is I'm going to do. And then when she gets back into the workforce, that's going to give me the freedom to maybe lose a little bit of money. Or to maybe develop a business and then leave my full-time job and take that pay hit while I'm developing the business even further. So if you find yourself with some of those obstacles, just realize that we go through stages in life, and not all of those stages are permanent, and maybe you have to be in a stage of developing your new lifestyle that corresponds with the stage of life you're in, and then when you move beyond that stage, you can take the next step in your business. So nothing is permanent, and I'm telling you right now, once you get started on this stuff, once you put a plan into action, well, then you start to feel a lot better about that day job that you have that has been wearing you down and grinding you down. Because once you can frame your perspective, and by the way, everybody, this is not a trick of the brain. This is putting something into action. The moment you put something into action, you reframe the perspective that you look at things. You can't trick yourself by just saying it to yourself. But the moment you take action steps, you do reframe things. And the moment you take an action step towards starting to build that lifestyle that you're looking for, that entrepreneurial, agricultural lifestyle, the moment you take that first step and you continue to take steps and you're building towards it, it reframes that job that you have that you don't like from something that you have to do and is just a grind to something that I'm going to do for now that's going to help me get to the next step, the next place that I am trying to get to. And that is a big deal. You have to, Dan Miller talks about this all the time on his 48 Days podcast, 48 Days Internet Radio show. He talks about praying with your feet or praying with your legs. I forget the exact terminology. And the difference is, and there's all sorts of old adages and there's sayings and stuff about this, but you can get down on your knees and you can pray every night for the life that you want and the lifestyle you're seeking. Or you can pray with your feet. You can pray with your legs, which basically means getting out there and hitting the street, and you get the same prayer, but you're getting out there and you're putting things into action. You're putting them into action. Now, I don't want to get deep into religious philosophy here, but the point that adage says, the point that Dan says when he's making it is, yes, pray and hope. But it's going to take every bit of prayer and every bit of hustle on your part to make it happen. So pray with your feet, pray with your legs. Get out there, put something into action. Get going on it. And you don't have to spend a bunch of money right now. You don't have to spend a bunch of time. Find 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day when you fulfilled your work, your home, your family obligations. Find 2 hours a day. It puts something into action. You will be amazed how it adds up. All right, quick word from our great sponsors, everybody. Of course, Lacrosse Footwear. You can find them over at lacrossefootwear.com. Done right since 1897. Lacrosse Footwear has been making quality boots for hunting, working, and tending the land for over a century. And yes, every day of the year, I use my Alpha Range boots from Lacrosse, which, by the way, I purchased way before Lacrosse was ever a sponsor, and I am still on that first pair, and that's what led me to Lacrosse, because I had tried multiple other brands, and I kept getting leaks in the neoprene, and it felt like I loved this type of rubber boot, and I was just reserved or resigned to the fact that I was going to have to buy a new pair every year. One pair was going to last one season, and that was that, until I found Lacrosse. I thought it was a fluke at first. Maybe I hadn't been working as hard recently. I don't know. But no, I'm still on the same pair. No leaks, no signs of any trouble in the wind. Lacrosse Alpha Range boots are fantastic. You're going to love them too. And then, of course, Powder River Livestock Handling Equipment. You can find them over at powderriver.com. And I'll tell you what, I love my Powder River. I'm getting ready to buy some more Powder River panels right now. And the reason being is we're expanding. Our herd's been growing. I'm expanding our feeding facilities. I'm going to make some changes there. And I'm not buying anything but Powder River ever again. Period. And I'm telling you why. Because everything else, our cattle bend. But Powder River don't get bent. Our livestock panels, they are so stout. And I'll admit to you, they're tough to move. They are stout. They are heavy, and they are built for cattle. They know what they're doing. But it's not just how heavy they're built or the quality of the steel they use. They put the rails on these panels. They put extra rails on them, which makes them heavier. But you know what? Cattle can't get their head between the rails. And 9 out of 10 panels I've had cows bend is because they're spooked, they're scared, they're confined, and they get their head between a rail, and they can get their shoulders against that panel and push and push and push, and they bend it. Well, the first level of defense in a Powder River livestock panel is they can't get their head between those rails. So they can never get their shoulders on that panel. And even if they could, I don't think they could bend them. They're built that well. So check out everything they've got to offer you. You can find them over at powderriver.com and let your local farm and ranch retailer know you want to see that Powder River green out in their sales yard. All right, well, let's jump back into this, everybody. So I want to touch on more parts of this email from Brendan. Now, he talked about wanting to start a direct-to-consumer meat business and being a first-generation farmer. And I applaud him on this idea because I think this is the idea. This is the niche to get you going if you're going to raise livestock. If you're going to raise vegetables, I think this is the niche to get you going, selling your vegetables. Whatever it may be, going direct to the consumer. You have so much more control and so much more ability to be profitable going direct. With that said, you give something up when you go direct. You give up the fact that your marketing's been done for you, right? If you're selling commodities, you just sell them. And by the way, if I could do that, I would do that. That's my favorite model. That's what I would love to do. But I have to grow to such a scale to be able to do that, to be profitable, that I choose direct marketing for myself. Not to say I'll never get there, or that I would reject it if I did get there. I wouldn't. I would love to do that, but I'm not at that level right now. So I market direct to consumer. And so what you miss out on, or what you add to the mix with a direct to consumer business, is marketing. You have to market. You have to talk about your product. You have to talk about why people will find value in spending their hard-earned money on your product. And you got to find the people, and you got to find the right people. Now, for those of you who are starting your farm business in a very, very agricultural centered area, this is more difficult for you. And the reason I say that is because if everybody around you is somehow involved in or very knowledgeable about agriculture, their lifestyle is based on agriculture, which, by the way, props to you if you live there, because that is where I want to be too. But when you're in that environment, people are not going to pay you as much for your direct marketed beef or chicken or whatever it may be. And that's because these are people who are involved or surrounded by agriculture on an everyday basis. So grass-fed and grass-finished is not going to mean as much to them. GMO-free is not going to mean as much to them. Pasture-raised or locally raised, all that, because they understand agribusiness. If you're going to go direct and you want to get a premium for what it is you're selling, you're going to have to market to, quite honestly, to folks who they are gathering their information about agriculture and about farming, not from people who are making their living in agriculture, but they're gathering their information from all these different areas out there. I'm talking areas like national publications and magazines and other people on YouTube and their friends and their family and stuff like that. And these are people who are going to value animals that are raised grass-fed, just everything I just said, grass-fed, grass-finished, GMO-free, pasture-raised, locally raised, however you want to put it, animal welfare approved, however, all the different buzzwords and all the different things. Now, understand that if this is your business model, what you're selling is a luxury product. Okay, so you're selling a luxury product. Why do I call it a luxury product? Because if something were to happen in our country, another, like a legit Great Depression, 20-25% unemployment, a pandemic that was like the 1918 pandemic where kids and adults and people were dying at high numbers, a world war like World War II, where everybody in the country was making sacrifices to help the war effort, then people all of a sudden would discover that they had room in their diets for beef that had been fed a GMO feed or beef that had been finished on corn or silage or something like that. They would find that they had bigger issues to deal with than how their beef was finished. Well, any product that won't survive a downturn like that or a crisis like that is a luxury product, right? I mean, if we went back to the early 1900s, nobody's buying a Tesla. We're just on the Model T, right? We just need to get from point A to point B. It's not about how cool it is, what it's doing for the environment, the luxury. It's not about that. It's about the basic functionality. So that's why I say direct marketed beef that you're getting a premium for because of the way you're raising it. It's a luxury item. And then you know what? There is nothing wrong with producing a luxury item. Rolex has made a great living. They've employed a lot of people, and they've been around a long time producing luxury items. There is a market for luxury items. Just understand what market that you're in. Okay, so now that you understand what market you're in, now we have got to find the consumers who are also in that market, and those consumers are going to be people with money. They're going to be people with money, and they're going to be people that are involved with and care about these issues. So generally, we are looking at people who are active in these circles and social media, and we are looking at people who are well educated, who are working in white-collar city jobs, making a good living, and they've got free time to be consuming information and then buying off, watching the documentaries and all this type of stuff that drives the demand for livestock that is produced in this manner. So where are you going to find those people? Well, if you're a first-generation farmer like Brendan, I find this to be a very, very interesting opportunity. Now, being a first-generation farmer, meaning it's starting here, it's starting today. I mean, let's be honest. It's a lot different than things were 100 years ago. That'd be what, 1920? How about 150 years ago when you could homestead, when the government would give you land? Not that that was easy. But if you look at the obstacles to getting land today as opposed to back then the obstacles were you had to clear it. You had to break it out. You had to get it into production. You might be dealing with elements that could kill you. You might be dealing with, if you were in Texas, you would be dealing with hostile, maybe Comanches that would run you off, kidnap you, kill you. You were dealing with other things, but it wasn't financial. And coming up with the money today to purchase land, that is a real challenge. We're gaining more and more people all the time who want their piece of dirt, and we're not gaining any more land. So how can land do anything but go up in price? Other than a bubble, other than a correction, it's always going to trend upwards. So that creates a challenge. But that does not mean that you can't get started. And a lot of first-generation farmers get started by leasing land. And this, to me, is a very interesting opportunity. Let me tell you about my place really quick. So I did not start that way. We bought our farm. And by the way, I have learned so much since we first bought this place, since I started my first business, which was about a year after we bought this place. And since I started this podcast and I've started interviewing entrepreneurs and learning more and more and more about ag business over the last 6 years now. Oh my goodness, 6 years. That I'm in a different place than I was back then. A lot of the things I tell you to do now are things I did not do because I was clueless. That's one of the reasons this podcast exists, because there was nothing like this out there. But let me tell you about my place really quick. So where we bought, you guys all know, because I complain about it constantly, we're on the rural-urban interface. And we're sprawling here outside of Boise, Idaho. We are sprawling, and the white vinyl fence and the subdivisions are encroaching closer to me every single day. I'll give you an example. A guy that I worked with at the police department, who retired after I'd been there about 4 years at the Boise Police Department, he and his wife have a 30-acre farm down the road from me. We live on the same road. And his place is down the road towards Kuna from me. He's one of the people, when I decided to buy this place, that I went and talked to and asked about the place. What do you think? Is it priced right? All this type of stuff. When I needed some help with custom farming, he's the person I went to and said, hey, did you ever hire anybody to do any custom farming for you? Would you recommend somebody? Do you know farmers out here? He was like the first person I went to help me start networking in agriculture in my new community. His place now, his driveway going down the west side of his farm, is bordered now by a brand new blacktop paved residential road and 6 foot tall solid white vinyl fence, brand new constructions, street lights, street signs, traffic. The 30 acres to his west got sold. It's been subdivided. It's been annexed. It's been developed. And it's a neighborhood. So I've watched this happen over our time out here. So that's what's going on around me. I'm not pleased with it. That's not the life that I ultimately want, but that is the life I find myself in right now. Well, that gives me a unique opportunity, at least to direct market my livestock and turn what is a small farm into a profitable farm. And that's because there are a lot of the people I just described to you moving into my area. They have disposable income. They're well educated. They're concerned about the topics I just ran down the list of for you. And they got a lot of free time and money. And they consume that free time with educating themselves and doing things that, well, we all do. We do things to make ourselves feel good about ourselves and the way we're living our lives. And in this circle, part of that is how they source their food. So that gives me a unique opportunity. And so if you're a first-generation farmer and you have not purchased anything and you're going to lease, when you're looking for where you're going to lease or what ground you're going to lease, obviously we want to look at things that traditionally we would look at. How many head of cattle can I run on it? Is it fenced well? Does it have water? Does it have irrigation rights if you live out here in the West? You know, all these different types of things. How much work am I going to have to do to get it in shape? What does the lease cost? But something with this model, with this direct-to-consumer model, we need to consider is, what's its proximity to my market? Now, you're going to have to, all of you listening, will have to think outside of the box on this one. But my place, my particular place, let me give you a little history on the Treasure Valley and Boise, or just a little snapshot, I should say. Boise for years has marketed itself, rightly so, and has been written up and talked about throughout the rest of the country as a place for people who like to recreate in the outdoors. It's a place for them to live. We have a ton of bicycle paths. We have both paved, great bicycle paths. We have good bicycle infrastructure. And then we've got trails in the foothills for mountain biking. It really, for a bicyclist, is a paradise if you're into that. And so over the years, and I'm talking over the last 20 years, it's had this snowball effect where people who do their 40 hours a week, They've got disposable income, and their life is a bicycling life. They like to ride road bikes. They like to ride mountain bikes. They like to ride both, by the way. Don't think they're just one. I know several people who do both. They look at Boise and they find a way to make it work. Now, I'm a bicyclist. Not as much as I used to be, but at one point in time I was a bicycle commuter. And at one point in time, Autumn and I, when we went somewhere, we would rent bikes and we'd do some long rides. And we did that a couple times in Texas. And I love Texas. Have I ever said that before? About 1,000,000 times. I absolutely love Texas. But as a bicycling state, it was nowhere near as friendly as what we have here in Boise. At least in the places where we rented bikes and we rode bikes. It just was not. And so the reason I bring that up is because that's a draw that this area that I live in has. And that's a legitimate thing. It may sound silly to those of us who want to farm, like you would move somewhere to ride a bike, but I'm telling you it happens. And then companies pay attention to that. And they look at, because they're just like you and me, they're looking at who is their market. Who are we trying to employ? And what are these people into? Because we got to be into it too, or they're not going to work for us. It's an amazing thing that goes on in our economy now. Now, that's transforming, by the way, with remote distance working. But that's not what this episode's about. So they look at that as well, and they might choose to base their headquarters in a place like Boise, Idaho, as opposed to, say, Austin, Texas, because the people they're looking for love to ride bicycles. And I use that example on purpose because about 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago, I read an article that Austin, Texas, trying to pull in tech, that had a lot of young, well-educated people working for them. They had companies, I think Amazon was the company, but I can't remember for sure, saying, no, we're not going to put a headquarters there. We're not going to relocate to Austin because you don't have enough bicycle infrastructure. And I remember reading an article that Austin was scrambling to put in bicycle infrastructure so they could attract these companies because they weren't coming if their employees weren't going to like it. It was too much of a risk for them. They could lose valuable employees that they sunk a lot of time and training and money into. Okay, now I say all of that so you understand what I'm getting at here with my outside-the-box way of marketing beef off of my farm. So, there's a lot of people in the Treasure Valley of Idaho that like to ride road bikes. It's very, very popular. Very popular. And these folks have money. They have disposable income. They're riding expensive bikes and they're in expensive gear. They've got cash. Well, that's not how our area, our county was developed. It was not developed based on one day we're going to have a bunch of bicycle riders here. And when these folks are not on their mountain bikes on a trail in the Boise foothills, they're on surface roads out here in the country trying to get away from traffic and trying to do a long, unencumbered ride where they can average 17, 20, 22, 24 miles an hour on their bike and go for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 miles without having to stop for a stoplight or a stop sign or something like that. So they're all coming out this direction. And they're doing 20 miles, 30 miles on a Saturday or on a Sunday on their day off. So we're set up on a traditional grid here in our county. There's not a lot of roads that don't follow the traditional grid pattern, which means it's difficult to escape traffic. But if you can discover some roads that kind of break that traditional pattern and there's something weird about them, you can get away from traffic. Well, where our farm is located, we happen to be in a little segment of road that kind of breaks that traditional grid pattern. It's not conducive for people to necessarily travel our road because it makes an S and it gets outside of the grid pattern. And no, if you look at a GPS map or any map, the most direct route, excuse me, is not going to look like it comes past our place. So what that means is a lot of people on road bikes have discovered our road. And so on Saturdays in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, and Sundays as well, I'll be working out on the farm, and I'll see a group, just one group. I'll see multiple groups during the day, but just one group of like 30 or 40 people on bicycles that have ridden from Boise, Idaho, and they're coming right past our place on a big group ride. Now, I'm a bicyclist, not as much as I used to be, but enough that I can relate and I can speak the language, I can look at the bikes and know what I'm talking about, and then I've got some tools. I've got tools to air up tires, I've got specialized tools, say to pull off a sprocket, all this type of stuff, right? And I've got direct marketed beef and pork for sale. Okay. So outside the box thinking for me, what about going to the end of my driveway on a Saturday, setting up a barbecue, having a cooler full of marinated beef that comes from my farm, having a bunch of bottles of water, of Gatorade, having my tools all down there, and putting up some signs. Free beef. Free barbecued beef for bicyclists. Free ice-cold water, ice-cold Gatorade, free repairs, or free use of bicycle repair tools for bicyclists. Now, I'll put up these signs. There's a good chance that on the first day I do this, bicyclists come by, they smell me barbecuing, they see me out there, I'm waving to them, I got some music playing, they see the sign, maybe nobody stops. But they see me, and like, what is up with that? Right? And maybe on the second Saturday, maybe next week, or maybe 3 weeks from now, one or two stop in. And I get to talk with them. And I get to say, yeah, I bike commuted for years. Now I'm self-employed, so I don't bicycle commute anymore. But we still try and get out on our bikes. We've got some loops out here we really like to do. Love seeing you guys come past. Hey, do you need any adjustments? I've got the tools you need over here if your bike's running weird. Because, by the way, you're out in the middle of nowhere, way away from town. If you're having trouble with your bike, you can only carry so many tools on your bike. But there are some things that can happen that will shut you down completely. So I've got tools here if you need them. Are you thirsty? Are you hungry? Does the steak smell good? Now, that first week, we may be eating all of the steak I cooked as leftovers. That's a total risk. But little by little, over the course of the season, the reputation's going to grow. People are going to start to talk about it. And by the way, why are you doing this? Is going to be the question I'm getting from everybody. Why are you doing this? Well, I'm a fellow bicyclist. I had a dream of having a farm. Here's our farm. I noticed everybody's riding by here. And I know you probably get hungry, and this is great for you on your ride. Here's some water. Just like to help out. And, oh, by the way, we sell direct marketed beef and direct marketed pork. Now, the direct marketed beef or pork game is a great game. The only issue you run into is scale. Can you sell enough to do this full-time, do nothing more for a living? Can you sell enough? That's the only part of this. And the big challenge when you're selling direct marketed beef or direct marketed pork is sticker shock, right? If somebody is buying a quarter beef, a half a beef, or a whole beef, they're going to fork out some cash to you when they get that beef. Now, they're saving money by doing it, but there's still sticker shock because it's so much money up front. And it's so much money up front, hoping it tastes good. But if they taste yours first, they already know. And I've interviewed a number of farmers on this show who direct market their beef to restaurants. And if you listen, go back and listen to any of those interviews, how do they get started? I always ask them, how do you get into this? How do you get in with the restaurant? The way they get in with the restaurant is they walk in there with meat. Some of it cooked, some of it not, and they give it to the chef, they give it to the restaurant owner, and they let them sample it. That is how they get started. I've talked about working for free 1,000,000 times on this show. Sometimes working for free is giving away your product for free and letting people see just what you're doing, letting them see the value in what you are doing. Now, you need to find something that is unique about you so you can rise above the noise of everybody else that you're competing with to sell direct marketed beef. In my case, that's going to be, I'm the bicycle guy that sells direct marketed beef. And I've got this, I see them come by. I mean, you're talking, you got a group of 30 or 40 people coming by on these beautiful road bikes. Say it's 40 people. You've got probably $100,000 worth of bicycles going by your house all at one time. Do you think that's a market you can hone in on? In my case, it certainly is. So the question for you is, what is your market? And not just for Brendan, but for any of you. What is your market that you can hone in on? And if you're a first-generation farmer and you're going to be leasing, do you have an opportunity like I have? Where you could be raising beef in an area that gives you high exposure to a particular target market? Now, I will tell you, let me tell you about a little bit more about Boise, Idaho, where I live. There are pockets. So there's a road in Boise called Overland Road. It's one of the busiest roads in the city. A lot of commercial activity on Overland Road. Very few residential, almost exclusively commercial. And for years, it's been developed now. But for years, there was like a 5-acre piece of ground that sat out there. It was fenced, it was irrigated, and it was in pasture. And it sat out there in a very busy commercial area. Now, that might not be the only place you lease, but could you possibly lease that place, raise as many cattle there as you could, and have the ability with these cows out there pastorally grazing on grass, doing what people want to see cows doing before they consume them? Could you be out there doing some direct marketing? So for those of you who are going to start out leasing ground, if you are near an urban area, can you find a little pocket within the city that hasn't been developed yet that people still have livestock on, or that you could put livestock on? And could you raise livestock there for the purpose of it being one huge billboard? So not only are you leasing the pasture and feeding your cattle, but it's a gargantuan billboard. People are seeing it happen in action. And you can be out there with a sign that says, beef for sale, meet the farmer. Free Pepsi. I don't know. Could you do something like that? You've got to come up with something unique, something that makes you stand out, and something that builds word of mouth. And then absolutely, you don't have to have a decent direct-to-consumer meat business. You're going to set the standard. You are going to be the person that others look at and go, why didn't I think of that? So come up with your unique selling proposition, your USP. What is it that's going to make you unique? What nickname are your customers going to give to you? Right? With me, it could be the bicycle beef dude or whatever. What could it be with you? If you've got customers that give you a nickname, you're there. You are there. That's word of mouth marketing. Dude, where'd you get this beef? It's so good. I got it from the bicycle beef dude. You got to check that guy out. Do your next long ride out through Kuna and go by his place. Stuff's delicious. Right? Come up with your unique proposition. All right, so a couple more things I wanted to touch on, just looking back at Brendan's email. He asked me about podcast or YouTube. Which should he do? For any of you who are looking at what I do is your form of off-farm income, which, by the way, I encourage you to really look into it. Low overhead. You can do it after everybody goes to bed, and there's real possibilities here. I talk all about the possibilities of the podcasting business in my other show, Microphone Money, which I did 43 episodes of that and capped it off, but it's still out there. Go check it out if you're interested in this. It's called Microphone Money, and the information is timeless. It's relevant. But the question is, why not do both? Now, I do both. I do the podcast, of course, and I do YouTube. I don't concentrate my time on YouTube like I do for the podcast. Now, there is only so much time in a day, and I'm doing 6 episodes a week of this show. I am doing now the Pioneer Tour podcast, the D&B Supply Show podcast. I am producing and editing podcasts in agriculture. And so my business is all transformed over to this. So there is only so much time during the day. I would like to do better YouTube videos. And I know how I could do them, but I don't have time to do them. But the question is, why not do both? I'm doing how many episodes a week? It's just crazy. But if you're doing the traditional 1 episode per week of your podcast, man, do YouTube as well. You should have time to make both look really, really good. You should have time. And so that's my answer to that. And then the question, how long before I monetize this podcast? Well, when I started this podcast, it was an investment. I've talked about that before, but I spent, about $3,000 to start it. So I bought a new computer, I bought a mic, I bought a mixer and a digital recorder, and then everything that had to come with that to make it all work, and then some subscriptions on the internet and stuff like that. And so I started it with a business plan, with a plan for what this was going to do for me, to create a platform, to give me credibility, to develop me as an expert, and then how I would monetize all of that. And the answer to that question, how long before you monetized, it took me about a year before I made some money off of the podcast. Certainly not full-time career, this is all I'm going to do for a living money, but some money to start recouping some of that investment and some of my monthly expenses, which really aren't very much. So it took me about a year, and my objective always was to monetize, but not necessarily to monetize the podcast, but to use the podcast to put me in a position to go out and make a living the way I do now. So that's all come true, but then I got surprised as the podcast grew. And by the way, I owe thanks to all of you for this. As the podcast grew, I started to get feedback from you. It made it possible for me to bring on sponsors like Powder River and La Crosse and to monetize that way. And that has been a blessing. That has been great. And that's been a surprise, and that has been icing on top of the cake. But that has been wonderful. So I always had the intention of making money in this. I didn't do it just for pleasure, but having the intention of making money in the podcast and then making all my decisions based around making money are two separate things. I made decisions for how I was going to build this podcast, the content I was going to bring, and how much time I was going to put into it based on making the best podcast I could and trying to produce something that would truly help my listeners succeed in the lifestyle they're seeking. And I made this podcast with the belief that I had gone through all the stages of frustration and depression and everything, thinking I would never be able to achieve the lifestyle I was looking for, and then finally found the way. And I started the podcast with the belief that I could help others who were going through the same thing as me also find their way. Because I had done it, and if I had done it, that meant they could do it, and I could show the way. I was the pathfinder on this particular method of achieving this lifestyle. So I didn't produce the podcast based on, if I talk this way, or if I'm controversial, or if I'm political, or if I take this stand, or if I don't, or if I bash this person, I'll make money. I didn't do it that way. I built the podcast that I wanted to build, knowing that eventually the monetization would come. So that was my philosophy on doing it. I think that's the right philosophy. It's not the fast philosophy, but I do think it is the right one. So really, that's kind of the answer to that. And man, Brendan, I am so thankful that you sent that question in, and so thankful I saved it so I could come back to it and talk about it today. I hope you all got something out of that. This lifestyle really is possible for all of you, but you've got to cut the BS. And I'm not accusing you of being caught up in BS, but I will tell you for sure that I was. I was caught up in self-medicating from my miserable job. By the way, being a police officer is a job that you can absolutely love, which I did at one point. I call it miserable not because the people there or the employers were miserable. I call it miserable because I was miserable. It was no longer the right fit for me. So please let me clarify that, because I don't want it to sound like I'm bashing law enforcement. I am not at all. I'm super proud of my 15 years of doing that. But I was miserable because I had grown out of that phase of my life, and it was no longer the right fit. And I will tell you right now, I'm not quite sure we were made to do one career, one job, day after day, year after year, for 30 or 40 years. I'm not quite sure that's how we were made. And I think a lot of people are discovering that. But, so I feel like it was very natural for me to phase out of my passion for that career after 10, 15 years. And to move on to something different. And when I say cut the BS, what I mean is this. Live your life in a way that when you do fade out, when your phase of life changes and that's no longer the right fit for you, live your life in a way that you can go make the change so you can be happy, right? Who cares how much you make? Who cares that there's a pension? Who cares that you've got great benefits? Who cares that you got seniority? What does all of that matter if you're miserable? And the only thing you can see, the only thing you can think about is that magic day in the future where you get retired, quote unquote retired. Who cares? Man, start living right now. Start living right now. And if I can help you down that path, that is exactly what this podcast is for. And this podcast is to help those of you who define happiness and define doing what you want to do as working hard with livestock, in the dirt, with crops, with row crops, with vegetables, with fruit, making wine, whatever it is agriculturally. That's who this show is for. And so hopefully I am helping you down that path. Okay, I could continue to wax on about that, everybody. I'm not going to. As always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.